All right, well, my name is Brice. I am an arborist and a tree lover and a person who just can't stop talking when he's surrounded by other people that are looking at him. So I might as well just do this, right? The first time I saw this property, it was right around Halloween of last year. So I came really late to the game. Jamie and the others have been working on this for like 2 years, 3 years, 4 years.
No, not me, but the others have been.
Pretty long darn time. So
yes.
I just didn't happen to know any of them, and so nobody asked me to come and check it out. Anyhow, the first time I walked onto the property, as an arborist, I see trees, but I also have a background in ecology and forest composition and stuff. So I look at things with the eye of trying to figure out what's happening, how it happened, how long it's been happening, when it started, where it's going, that kind of thing. When I see a woodlot or a forest, I'm looking at a snapshot in time where I happen to be at the same time as it, but in my head I'm thinking, okay, what did this look like, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, whatever. The property, we sort of divided up into the woods, which is the front, and the arboretum section, which is the back. And I hesitate to call this a forest because it's not really a forest. We've got a lot of trees, but there's something missing. Does anybody know what's missing from this forest?
Underbrush.
Underbrush, yes. This is mowed. This is, in ecology terms, we would call this a prairie. And prairies don't happen in Villanova, Pennsylvania, folks. The natural state of the land that we're in, by the way, Pennsylvania, Penn's Woods, it was named appropriately. In the 1600s, the Europeans were just astounded at how much forest there was here. It was all forest, with very few exceptions. And this area would have been no different. It's difficult to know if this area was logged or cleared for agriculture or whatever. It was probably cleared at least once since Europeans have arrived, but I have reason to believe that this property hasn't really been involved in agriculture for probably 150 or 200 years. Anyway, so when I walk up the path, I see, okay, there's a great big red oak there, that's Quercus rubra. Right here we've got a tulip tree, that's Liriodendron tulipifera. There's a lot of tulip trees. We've also got this nice smooth gray bark American beech, that's Fagus sylvatica. We also have a big white oak there, that's Quercus alba. And I don't know if you can see past the beech here, but on the other side of the beech there's a big tall skinny tree, and that's that's a white ash. That's Fraxinus americana. Those are all native trees. They're all native hardwoods. By the way, hardwood as opposed to softwood, there's no such thing as softwood. Most of our building materials around here are made from conifer trees. That's the opposite of a hardwood, is a conifer. If you've ever been hit by a pine 2x4, it's not soft, but that's just the terms we use, hardwood and softwood. So hardwoods are deciduous broad-leafed trees. Anyhow, there's a certain sequence to how things happen in the forest around here. Is anybody familiar with the term forest succession, primary succession, secondary succession? Climax species, those kinds of things. These are all ecology terms that are applied to plant communities. And the idea is, okay, assuming that there's a major disturbance like a landslide or a forest fire or like a volcano eruption or, Weyerhaeuser, that's a paper company, folks. It's a logging joke. Anytime there's a major disturbance, it could be agriculture for a few hundred years, and then people just sort of stop and they leave the land to do what it wants to do. The first thing that happens when there's cleared land is, because nature abhors a vacuum and because all the plants and trees and everybody else are constantly putting seeds out there, stuff is going to start growing real quick after that disturbance. So assuming you have a colonial homestead and they were practicing some sort of agriculture, as soon as they stop, it's an old field. That's year zero. The first few years are going to be, lots of herbaceous plants and some woody plants, some shrubs, but also some fast-growing, sun-loving tree species. And these are what we call pioneer species. So a pioneer is someone who gets out there before everybody else and starts something up. Well, that's what a pioneer species does. Tulip tree is the consummate pioneer species in this area. They grow over 100 feet tall, and most of their seeds are held in the top 20 feet of the tree. And all winter long, those seeds are waiting up there, and they're very small, and they're wing-shaped, and they fly on the lightest breeze. And so every time there's a light gust of wind in the winter, those tulip tree seeds are falling in some direction or another, and they're spinning so they stay in the air longer so they can travel further. So if you have one tulip tree upwind from a disaster area, a few decades later, you're just going to have a forest of tulip trees. So those are the pioneers, the white ash, the tulip tree. In some cases you have red maple, other species that pioneer an area. Okay, so year 0, old field. Year 25, you've got a woodlot. You've got a lot of young trees. The ground is now darker and more moist, and the soil is more rich because all of the debris coming from those trees for 20 or 30 years is you've got leaf litter. And in nature, we don't rake the forest. Whatever lands there just rots there. And so the soil is being improved. There's more moisture, as I said, because the trees are there. They're shading the ground. And then you get another group of trees that come in. Those are the secondary succession trees. That is often what we would call your climax community. So as the tulip trees and the ashes are maturing and getting taller, the understory opens up a little bit, and that's when you get things that need shade to start. They need to be in the understory, and that's things like your white oaks and your hickories, and in some cases even hemlock, which is a conifer. But the point is, if you have a year 0 situation and you come back in 50 years, you're going to have fairly mature pioneers and a cohort of understory seedlings of those climax species, right? And then you go another 50 years, and most of those pioneer trees are really big, and they're starting to fall apart, and they're giving way to those secondary trees. That climax species is starting to fill in, and eventually you go another 50 years, there's almost no pioneers left because they're all big and old and falling apart, and they're sun-loving, so they're not going to show up in the understory because it's full, right? So then you start to have more mature and full-size climax species, and then another 50 or 100 years, the woods are nothing but climax species, and there are no pioneers at all. If there are any pioneers left, they're huge and they're rotting and falling apart, and there's a much younger, more robust population of climax species. Well, that's not what we have here. If you go to Ridley Creek State Park, you'll see that. You'll see a lot of big old tulip trees and a lot of younger beeches and oaks. If you go to Rolling Hill Park in Gladwin, you'll see that when you're hiking around. The biggest, oldest trees are the pioneers, and the younger ones are the ones that are going to be the climax species. Well, here we've got this tulip tree. From my experience, I'll tell you, this tulip tree is only about 100 years old, but the beeches are more like 150 to 175, and the white oak there might actually be closer to 200 years old. So it's backwards, and that made me ponder. It actually took me a month to come up with this explanation, and here it is. Tulip tree, ash, about 100 years old. What happened 100 years ago? Okay, let's think. 1923. Well, I'll tell you, in 1904, chestnut blight arrives in the United States, in New York City. Chestnut blight is unstoppable. Back then, people were very industry-minded and very resource-minded, and they realized that the chestnuts were all just going to get annihilated. And American chestnut was a valuable timber species. It had already been an important part of the North American timber market for hundreds of years. And when the science-minded among the populace back in 1904 and the years thereafter, they noticed that this blight was killing chestnuts further and further away from New York. It was spreading on the wind. As I said, it's unstoppable. And also, there's no treatment for it. Once a tree is diagnosed with chestnut blight, it's going to be kaput eventually. So they figured out, all right, it's spreading. It's just going further and further. And what they decided after maybe 10, 15 years, they figured, okay, we're just going to cull all of our chestnuts because they're all going to die anyway. We might as well take them all down and make use of them. And anybody heard of wormy chestnut? Anybody into antiques? Wormy chestnut furniture? Wormy chestnut is furniture that was made out of chestnut trees that were already infested with the beetles that carry the fungus for chestnut blight. So even if they already were infested, it was still good wood, and they still made stuff out of it. And now it's very expensive. It's highly sought after, and people even fake having wormy chestnut. They'll drill little holes in it and pretend that it's real, authentic wormy chestnut. Anyway, so by I think it was 1913, one of the Bodines who lived in Stoneleigh was actually on the local board, the organization involved in dealing with the American chestnut blight in Pennsylvania. A Bodine was on that board. So I have every reason to believe that not only were there chestnuts in the wooded areas around here, but they would have all cut them down, and all at once. And by the way, American chestnut, before the blight, about a quarter to a third of the trees, the number of trees in North American forests were American chestnut. And about half of the area of the canopy, when viewed from above, was taken up by American chestnuts. So they were dominating the forest, right? And so if suddenly you take out half of the surface area of the canopy, you've opened up a lot of light gaps on the forest floor, right? And that actually imitates the year zero phenomenon. So what I think happened was, 150 years ago, this was climax forest, beech, oak, chestnut, got rid of all the chestnuts, and then what filled in? Pioneer species. So we don't have a time machine. We can't prove me right or wrong, but I think it's a neat theory. And other people that I know that are really into woods, they're not yelling, Brice, that's totally stupid. They're going, yeah, that holds water. I like it. So anyway, it's not really a forest because people mow. I think if the school district relents and the property is not developed, we could turn this into a forest, and it would be kind of cool to watch that happen, especially if school kids are involved. Even from the middle school level, definitely at the high school level, kids want to learn and they like being outside. And so I think it would be great if we somehow had access, even if the school district does not own Oakwell, it would be great to use this property to teach.